And at 10, SCP-055. What? And at 10, SCP-3008. SCP-3008 actually has its own game. This SCP used to be a branch of the famous IKEA furniture sales company, however it was bought by the Foundation in order to research its anonymous properties. After entering SCP-3008 and losing sight of the door, you will be transported into SCP-3008-1, where the door will no longer remain and you will be stuck inside. The current area of the SCP is unknown, and guessed at minimum 10 kilometers squared. Inside SCP-3008-1 exist individuals that were trapped due to prior experiments, and there is currently no known way to escape. If a human does escape SCP-3008, they are debriefed before given an anesthetic and a covering story about why they were missing. However, none of them remember how they escaped, which is hella useful, thanks. Inside SCP-3008 also reside SCP-3008-2, which are humanoid entities that appear to be similar to employees of IKEA, but with exaggerated and inconsistent bodily proportions. The SCP also contains a day-night cycle indicated by overhead lighting turning on or off. During the night, the employees will become aggressive and will chase you while asking you to leave the building, and are unresponsive to verbal cues, and will attack you during the day if you attack them, which fair enough. Go watch the video where I play this game for a better idea, and ask for more of it because I love that game and I want to play it more. And at 9, SCP-049. Also known as the Plague Doctor, SCP-049 is generally cooperative with Foundation personnel. It resembles a Plague Doctor wearing a similar mask and wearing thick robes that seem to have grown out of its body over time, making them indistinguishable from the figure below. The SCP is capable of speech in a variety of languages but prefers English or French, so obviously Canadian, you might as well have a cup of Tim Hortons. SCP-049 can become hostile and aggressive if it senses the presence of the pestilence. It is unknown the exact nature of this pestilence and they don't know what it could be, but it is of grave concern to the SCP. If left unrestrained, he will attempt to kill any individual he deems afflicted with this pestilence. Anyone that he kills, he will begin surgery on immediately, turning them into SCP-0492, which are reanimated corpses of his victims. They retain no memories or mental functions and only have basic motor functions, and are under control of the SCP. So you can just sick them. And at 8, SCP-372. SCP-372 lurks in the shadows. Well, not exactly. The creature is of an unknown species, approximately 2 meters long and weighing approximately 45 kilograms. It's long and thin with 8 pairs of narrow limbs. That's 16 arms, guys. They are extremely fast and abnormally flexible. The SCP is so fast it is able to move behind you as you move your eyes, since there is a moment of temporary blindness when you look in a new location. It's actually true, try it. Look at the screen and then look somewhere else without turning your head. If you pay close enough attention, you can tell that there is a split second where you see black. It is very short and hardly noticeable if you aren't looking for it, but SCP-372 is able to move from in front of you to behind you within that time frame. It prefers not to be seen, staying behind you or in your blind spots, and it is able to do this with every personnel member in its vicinity, even if there is multiple at once. And anyone pretending to see the SCP in front of them to prank nervous personnel will be severely reprimanded. And at 7, SCP-427. SCP-427 is a small, spherical, ornately carved locket of silver material. The carvings don't appear to affect the abilities of the object in any way, though. This SCP was created by man after test putting a pill from SCP-500 into the input booth of SCP-914. In the center of the locket, when opened, is a small glowing orb that's visible at the center. This orb emits no radiation. When the object is opened and exposed to biological tissue, it rapidly regenerates cellular damage and is able to fight off infections. It can fight off the common cold in 4 minutes. But long-term exposure is a significant risk to any persons using SCP-427. If used for too long, the personnel involved in the experiment begins mutating into a shapeless mass of flesh. These beasts created by the SCP are incredibly aggressive and cannot communicate or understand personnel, and due to these reasons are classified as Keter, the most aggressive of the bunch, and must be killed immediately. It's like, oh dang. This can be found in the game SCP Containment Breach, and I am unsure if it has any effect on the player, so it's free, so go play it and tell me. In at 6, SCP-173. SCP-173 appears to be constructed from concrete and rebar, with traces of Krylon branded spray paint. He is extremely hostile but cannot move when within a direct line of sight. When being tested on, 2 persons must maintain eye contact until all personnel have vacated and relaunched the container. Anyone inside the containment chamber must alert the other before blinking as to ensure the other one keeps his eyes open, and the object is reported to attack by snapping the necks at the base of the skull, or if he's feeling rather rude, just plain old strangulation. This is terrifying. This creature is the reason that SCP Containment Breach has a blinking feature, so that this thing is a threat and can't just be stared at the whole time. In this game, this is the first SCP you encounter, when you will watch it kill 2 guards and escape into the ventilation system. Well, the power is off, so you don't technically see it, but like, it's just scary, okay? And at 5, SCP-096. SCP-096 is also known as the Shy Guy, who remains docile unless provoked, which then turns him extremely hostile and aggressive. He has very little muscle mass and appears to be suffering from malnutrition, arms that extend to his knees, and his skin lacking pigmentation. Provoking this SCP is quite simple. All one must do is see his face, even if accidental. Once you have seen SCP-096's face, he will stop at nothing until he has killed you. After killing the provoker, he will sit down for several minutes before becoming docile once again. This SCP actually has his own game. SCP-096 is available in browser as well as on iOS and Android devices, where he has escaped his containment, and for some reason, you give yourself the task of tracking him down. He also appears in SCP Containment Breach and can be seen in all metal corridors, the gated hallway, gas catwalk, and 3-way gas catwalks. And if you do see his face, it's just, the face itself is creepy as hell. Number 4, SCP-XXXX. SCP-XXXX apparently seems to have a grudge against Foundation personnel. The SCP is a small cube, roughly 2 to 3 centimeters cubed, and whenever someone tries to describe SCP-X in more detail, the description they give deviates greatly from the original, such as pink monkey pork chop, a scum procrastinating cranberry kazoo, an elephant-like aardvark eating a corn on the cob stuffed toaster, and my ex. The anonymous properties, aside from being able to manipulate the description, involve controlling the actions of others. When within 10 to 20 meters of the object, any subject who performs an action the SCP doesn't like will be forced into doing the opposite of what they intended. Move your arm up, you'll move it down. Step forward, you'll step back. Turn right and you'll turn left. Attempt to contain SCP-X and you'll let it go. This has resulted in an unknown amount of containment breaches. Ironically, this SCP can only be found in SCP Blackout, which is currently in early access on Steam, so if you like early access, because it sounds high-tech or whatever, go check it out. Number 3, SCP-1048-A. A teddy bear made of pure ears. It can emit a high-pitched shriek that inflicts intense pain on the ears and eyes of anyone within 10 meters. If you come within 5 meters of the subject when it shrieks, you begin to grow ear-like extremities all over your body, completely covering it within 20 seconds. Every person affected with this condition dies within 3 minutes. The cause of death is asphyxiation, meaning the ears grew in both your mouth and throat enough to block airflow. You thought the teddy bear from Supernatural was bad? A teddy blowing his stuffing out with a gun can't even come close to one that will cause ears to grow in your mouth, all over your body, in your throat, and suffocate you. Imagine Sam and Dean trying to fight this damn thing. Side note, can we get another Supernatural-like show where like 2 brothers or something hunt SCPs? I can smell the next CW series. Again, $1 million for that idea. Willing to negotiate down to like 700,000. This SCP can also be found in SCP Containment Breach, and I'd do yourself a favor and just, no, don't do it. Stay away. Ears. Penultimately, at number 2, SCP-008. SCP-008 is a complex gas that essentially turns people into zombies. The traits of this SCP include 100% chance of infection, 100% chance of death, transmission through all bodily fluids and mucus. If infected, the individual will gain a high fever, increased red blood cell count, resulting in slow blood flow and increased muscle endurance and strength, decreased metabolism, high blood viscosity, conditioned behavior, and zombie-like actions. Neutralizing a fully infected subject requires significant cranial trauma, so a massive blow to the head, like a headshot. Like any form of zombie. Could you imagine if this was real? Like the real consequences of these creatures existing in our normal world? Maybe they already do, but they're better at containing them than we originally know. Or maybe these files are real, but disguised as fan forms to warn us and make us prepared. Finally, in at number 1, SCP-106. No physical interaction with SCP-106 is allowed under any circumstances. He must be contained in a sealed container comprised of 40 layers of lead-lined steel. Each layer must be separated by a minimum of 36 centimeters of empty space. He appears to be an elderly human, with very advanced decomposition. The rotting quality about him is consistent between all descriptions of SCP-106. While being observed, he will remain motionless, waiting for prey. SCP-106 is also capable of scaling any vertical surface and can remain suspended upside down indefinitely. When attacking, he will attempt to damage major organs, muscle groups, or tendons, and then pull the prey into a pocket dimension where he kills them. He is also capable of passing through solid matter, leaving behind a patch of corrosive black goo that will cause rusting, rot, decay, or cracking on any material touched. This effect will begin within seconds. Do you know how terrifying that is? Holy shit! Starting us off at number 10, SCP-432. You walk through the dark corridors of a maze in search of a box, before the monster can get you. The monster is of course SCP-432, and is the main antagonist of the game. He can appear randomly and typically has a pair of glowing red eyes if the player is not in sight. If you run into the monster, you will instantly die and be sent back to the main menu. The gameplay consists of walking through corridors. You will find various objects throughout the maze, and also hear lots of scary sounds. This game probably isn't the scariest, hence the high placement, but Markiplier did seem to be terrified while playing. In all honesty, he was probably faking it for the camera, but it's not like he was falling out of his chair crying. If you would like to play this, however, I suggest you check it out. You can find it online, just search up SCP-432 game on Google and it should be easy enough. Next up at number 9, SCP-087. Released January of 2012, SCP-087 is a first-person survival horror game. With the only controls being movement and quip, you know this game must be a creepy one. Player starts off in a stairwell that is being tested by the Foundation. The player must wander through several floors. There are a set number of floors per round, however it varies round to round. One time you can play and have 34 floors, the next round 100, but it typically ranges from 60 to 150. You win the game by making it to the last floor, but as you approach, you can see SCP-0871's face in the darkness. If you get close enough, SCP-0871 will charge at the player, causing the game to crash. So be quick or be careful, if you can even make it there. While going down the levels, you will have various screen effects and scary noises that will probably make you want to quit, run to your mommy, have her say she loves you, then go right back to the game because that's the kind of person you are. Number 8, SCP-087-B. Think of this as an expansion pack to SCP-087. Released 11 days after SCP-087, SCP-087-B adds more levels and more monsters. The floors now range from 150 to 180, and you're being hunted by a plethora of monsters that you must evade, since the Foundation didn't give you a gun. Why? I don't know, it's like they're sending you down there for sport. You must evade the Masked Man, who is a dark humanoid with a white mask who manifests themselves in the darkness and will instantly kill the player on contact. The Red Mist Monster, another humanoid with glowing white eyes and red markings who acts similar to the Masked Man, but changes the location in which it spawns. And the Cheshire Smile. Just your typical run-of-the-mill disembodied twisted smile with piercing white eyes. It does not hurt the player, however, and it is simply used as a scare tactic when it whispers no into your ear and then starts staring at you. Man, that's weird, that's how I flirt. And at 7, SCP-096 Modest. Subject 96 is an emotionally disturbed mutant emitting screams, moans, and cries. Most of the time he spends sitting against the wall, muttering incoherently, and covering his face with his hands. Threat at the times of outbursts of aggression is high, but these bursts are typically caused by closely examining his face. In this game you play as a Foundation member going about daily patrols until there is an announcement that SCP-096 has escaped, and you give yourself the task of tracking it down. The game is free to play and it can be done in browse, so no messy file folders, zips, or even EXEs, which is unfortunate since I know you all love EXEs so much. This game, however, if you'd like a portable version, is also available on iOS and Android devices, so if you'd rather make your pants brown on the subway, then opt for this version instead. And at 6, SCP Terminal. SCP Terminal is the first text-based SCP game, taking inspiration, structure, style, and lore from the SCP Foundation wiki, with the addition of the ambient horror felt by most other games based on the Foundation, while also adding a creative twist. It has the largest goal of any any SCP game, adding every single SCP from the entire SCP Foundation wiki into the game. It was geniusly made from a custom engine created by cobbling together piles of random scripting programs and even exploiting the bugs in its own system to allow for a game of this scale to be made with like scratch. The creator is hosting votes on what new SCPs should be added first and posts regular updates and such through his Twitter account @Abarano. While this game will take a while to be fully complete, the game does get updated regularly, so if you're a text-based fiend and love the feel of those kind of games, go check it out. Halfway through at number 5, SCP-3008. Ever been stuck aimlessly in an IKEA for hours? How about doing that in a video game because we all know we don't want to go outside? Well, SCP-3008 is an endless IKEA world that has workers who want to kill you, settlements where you find other humans who trade, and furniture that you can break for materials, move around, and build things out of. Basically IKEA Minecraft. I was going to say Swedish Minecraft, but not just Swedish, isn't he? This game is multiplayer and does or will feature additional game modes, rather than just, I guess, survival. Like a tower building mode where players have to stack furniture as high as they can within a certain time limit, and a floor is lava mode. You can probably tell what that's gonna be. In at 4, SCP Secret Laboratory. Deep within the SCP Foundation during a containment breach, many of the anomalies have bypassed security and escaped from their chambers, without peaceful intentions. Become site personnel, a recontainment agent, or an anomalous entity, and fight to take control or escape the facility. The underground facility suffers from multiple breaches from various SCP objects which escape their containment chambers. During this event, multiple players are given roles to play. Class D personnel, prisoners kept for the purpose of being lab rats. Their mission is to escape the facility without getting any attention from others. Nine-tailed fox, team designated to neutralize the danger and rescue scientists. Breach attendant that tries to escape the facility alive. SCP Object, anomaly trying to kill as many people as possible. I relate. Currently only a few SCP objects can be found in game, but progressively their numbers will grow in oncoming updates, so be wary of that. Can also be Chaos Insurgency, Foundation traders trying to help Class D to escape in order to obtain helpful information. The randomly generated facility and role division makes every game special and full of sensations. The winning team is the one that finishes all of its objectives, so you can gather your friends and lock yourself in a containment site with dangerous monsters who want to eat your face. In the game you can encounter SCP-172, SCP-106, SCP-049, SCP-914, SCP-096, SCP-939, and SCP-079. And at 3, SCP Containment Breach. SCP Containment Breach is a free-to-play first-person horror game. You play as a human test subject, but your goal is to escape from the underground SCP Containment Center after a security breach that has also let dangerous anomalies escape. The game is procedurally generated, meaning it's generated off a selection of pre-existing rooms and hallways, so no two games will ever be the same, unless you play it too much. You also have to play the game. You can't Stanley Parable this game. If you refuse to leave your cell, you will be quickly terminated with poisonous gas. The SCP Foundation is so nice, aren't they? This game also has the mechanic of blinking, which lets the SCPs get closer to you and basically makes the game a hell of a lot more difficult. In the real world, we don't see our blinks for the most part, unless we are looking for them. But in this game and in this situation, they are so painfully long. Penultimately at number 2, SCP Unity. This game started off as a port and graphics update for SCP Containment Breach. However, since initial release it has become its own game. It has expanded to include a wider array of content, such as new SCPs, a deeper and richer story, and graphic improvements. The game, however, is years from completion, so it does not take the number 1 spot, and for another reason which you'll see why in a minute. But this game beats out the original because the gameplay has been improved significantly. The SCPs have been improved as well and have been added onto. You can now encounter SCPs 106, 173, 178, 207, 330, 500, 553, 650, 714, 914, 939, 983, 1079, 1499, and 1762. So yeah, significant improvement, with the upcoming addition to SCP-131 and the inclusion of anomalous ducks. Whatever that is. You'll have to see what I mean for yourself, and I'll have to see it too, because my god, anomalous ducks. Finally, taking our number 1 spot, SCP Blackout. SCP Blackout is by far going to be the most intense of all of these games. You play as a D-class officer in the secret SCP research site, Site 50. When everything falls apart, you need to use what you can to explore the facility, access logs to learn about what you're encountering, and run for your life from the SCPs that have escaped. This game is currently in early access, but there is a story mode which is not yet available. And there's also a survival mode. This game is at the top of the list because unlike any others that I found, you can play this game in virtual reality. You can literally put yourself in this situation and piss your pants. I get scared at the spiders in Skyrim VR, how the hell could I do this? I do however have an Oculus and feel as if I should try it. I don't know, it looks actually terrifying from the trailers and screenshots, but maybe that's a good thing.